All right, ladies and gentlemen, this is Chef Dan Schifano here. I just wanted to walk you through some components of the freeze dryer first. What we have here, this is actually what's going to carry our trays for the freeze dryer. And if you look on the top there, you're going to see those orange pads. And then if we come around to the back, you're going to see where the electricity plugs in. And those orange pads are actually the heating elements that are going to control the heat for the freeze drying process. Next, we have our trays that are going to fit inside of this rack, and this whole thing's going to go into the freeze dryer, and I'll show you how that works in a second. Next, we have some silicone pads or silicone mats for the trays. These aren't always needed. You're going to want to use these when you're dealing with something sugary to help it keep it from sticking from the trays. Next, we have our gasket. This is an important piece of the equipment here. This is what's going to create the seal in order for us to have the vacuum. Without vacuum, freeze drying doesn't happen. Next, we're going to move into tools we need for packaging. So first we have our moisture meter, and this is just a simple one you can buy at Lowe's or on Amazon, 20 to 30 bucks. They get way more expensive, and this is just to check moisture content in our freeze-dried foods before we finish the process. Some people have started using FLIR cameras for that, and I'll explain that a little more in the presentation when we start talking about packaging. Next we have our impulse sealer. This is what we're going to use to seal our Mylar bags here. And then we have oxygen absorbers that are going to help keep any additional oxygen from packaging. That's going to help give us longevity in our packaging. Last, cleaning materials. Very basically, we have some scrubbies here for inside the hoses, as well as I use just basic sanitizer and a little bit of mild detergent when I clean the freeze dryer. All right, so this is our basic freeze dryer setup. We're using the Harvest Right freeze dryer. This is the large version. As we make sure our software stays up to date. Our basic menu here is going to be our test menu that allows you to test the different functions: freezing, heating, vacuum, and then the auxiliary relay is what's going to turn the vacuum on and off. Then our customization menu. As you get more into this, this is where you're going to be able to tweak your initial freezing temperature, the amount of time you want drying, and the temperature you want to dry at. When you start playing with these, you're going to start seeing changes in your finished product. In some products, you might have to tweak a little bit in order to get proper outcomes, especially the extra dry time. The larger the product, if it has a thicker, heavier skin, it's going to need additional drying time as well. Temperature, I try not to mess with too much. If you go too high, you will start actually changing the product as far as cooking it. We're trying to avoid that. We're trying to preserve the product as is. All right, next, inside our freeze dryer, we do not have our gasket on yet. We do not have our trays on yet. This is our electrical connection that's going to control the heating element. In the back, we have our drain port. That is what I'll use that pipe cleaner snake for. In between each use, you make sure to clean out the drain. And that drain brings us over here where we have our drain valve. Right now our valve is currently open. In this piece of plastic tubing, I usually try to replace once every 6 months or so, depending on use. As it gets discolored, I'll just replace the plastic pipe. These are very cheap. You can buy them at any big box store. Just make sure you get food grade safe plastic. All right, so next we're going to show you how these pieces go together. I already showed you the back component on the heating element, and I'm going to go ahead and hook these in here and show you the assembled freeze dryer. So here we have our freeze dryer fully assembled. This ring simply is removed. And then this whole unit just slides out, and on the back there is where we'll connect that power unit. When you put this in, you want to make sure you try to get these as level as possible. I don't get a level out or anything by any means, but just in case you have a liquid product in there, that way you're not coming off the trays. There is a groove on the back of the ring. You want to make sure that this is seated properly. If this gasket is not on here properly, you're not going to get a good seal, and you will not get freeze drying. All right, and then when we close, this should close down tight, and you can see where we're actually getting a good seal all the way around, and that's before we even have the vacuum turned on. So that is the assembled freeze dryer. Next, we're going to load up some trays and get some product going for you. The first thing we need to do, though, is we got to start our process. You have to pre-freeze the chamber. It takes about 15 minutes, so we will start that process of pre-freezing that vacuum chamber. So when our product goes in, we can just go ahead and start. Right, so we have our freeze dryer up to temperature, down to temperature. It's been 15 minutes. We want to make sure that that vacuum drain is closed, which I'll do right now. So we're now in that closed position, perpendicular rather than parallel. We're going to go ahead and do some skills today. So with these, you want to make sure that you are evenly distributed and you have some room on the tray, because these will expand on you a little bit. This is where freeze drying gets tricky. Some people will pre-freeze their foods, and if I'm doing anything liquid or anything large, I will absolutely pre-freeze. But with these Skittles, they're pretty easy to do and pretty consistent, so I do not pre-freeze in. So what we'll do is we'll end up taking these over to here. So we'll open our vacuum chamber up, and then we'll grab our Skittles tray, and then we'll load these in, and then we will get all these loaded and we'll start the process. All right, so we got our freeze dryer loaded. We'll go ahead and come up here, hit our continue button. That's going to kick on the freezer, and then this will freeze. And then the next step is it will freeze under vacuum, and then it will apply heat and the freeze drying process will begin. When this is all done, we'll get a little notice up here saying process complete, please check. And that's where we will pick up at next. So as you can see, we've had a significant change in our Skittles. We are closing on the final couple hours of drying. These are probably done already, but I'm gonna go ahead and let that finish the cycle, and then we'll pull them out and take a look afterwards. All right, so our freeze drying process has completed, as we can see. So we have a couple options here. What we can do is, we're not under vacuum right now, so we can open the chamber. At this point, if I wasn't doing just candy, I would pull out whatever product I'm doing. I would use the moisture meter. I would test to make sure that it's completely frozen, or not completely frozen, completely freeze dried. Other things we can do at this point is, if you don't have a moisture meter, you can simply just break up some of the food. If there's any ice crystals left in the food, there's still water in the food and it's not properly freeze dried. This is where a lot of people will use the FLIR camera, the cameras that are thermal, and they'll let this stuff sit out, and as it comes up to room temperature, all the rest of the food will start to warm up. If there's any water left in the food, that FLIR camera, that thermal camera, will show you where there is ice in the food. And if there's ice, there's water. And if there's water, you're not freeze dried. So at this point, we'll finish unloading our freeze dryer. All these Skittles, the process has complete. It's very important at this point to make sure that you let this product come up to room temperature. You do not want to package it cold. If you package it cold, you're going to get condensation and moisture inside the bags, and you're going to end up with spoiled product. With our freeze dryer, there's a couple options with this one. So if it wasn't done, you can press the more dry time. You can also warm the trays, and that's just going to help you that food come at room temperature quicker. I do not like to use the warm tray function. If you look in here, you're going to see that there's ice forming on the side of the chamber. That ice is the moisture that was pulled out of the food. If you were doing any kind of food that isn't just candy, there's going to be a lot more ice in there. I've had instances in the past where I do the warming the tray, and the ice will actually contact up here, which will then cause the ice to melt and drip on the food, putting water back into the food. So I really never use that warm tray function. But at this point, you can then choose to either defrost the chamber if you want to get it clean and go right away, or no defrost and just let it do naturally over time. I usually do the no defrost and just leave the freeze dryer open to defrost over time. But either way, we'll select our option, no defrost. So I'm using, this is the vacuum pump for the freeze dryer. The vacuum pump we have is an oilless pump, and so we have to let that run for 5 minutes. It's part of the maintenance process. I chose the oilless pump because with the oil pumps, you have to change the oil every single time. So it's a maintenance issue, it's hassle, it's cost of oil. The oilless pumps are more expensive. They have about the same shelf life, but you're gonna save money in the oil over time, and it's a little less maintenance. All you have to do is run this for the 5 minutes and you should be good to go. Before we do that though, we need to open up that vacuum line and let it go. So vacuum line's open. I have a bin here to catch any moisture that comes out as it defrosts, and we'll let that go. When it's done, we'll open up the freeze dry chamber and let that defrost overnight, and then we will clean that out and get it prepped for our next batch. With these guys, at this point, I would let these sit 10 or 15 minutes before I start packaging them. And to package them, you're simply going to portion them into your Mylar bags, add an oxygen absorber to each bag, and then use your Impost sealer to seal. I am not going to package these in Mylar, just for the simple fact that in 3 days, they're going to be coming to you guys for a demo. So instead, we're going to let these come to room temperature, get them in some Ziplocs with some oxygen absorbers. That way I don't waste the Mylar bags, which are a little more expensive. And they will be fine for the 3 days until we get to you guys and you can do a little tasting. So yeah, these are the Skittles that hopefully you guys will be tasting now. Enjoy.